we'll reach out to him and grab him. He is the author of this amazing book, Generation Restoration, published by Wiley, and I only mention publishers very rarely. There, Tim's in. He's here with us, and
Hi there.
we'll let him talk about it instead of me. Tim, how are you, man?
Very good. Good to see you. One second. Not sure you can hear me.
I can hear you just fine. You're coming in loud and clear.
Very nice. Let me see if video works as well.
Yep, you got your video.
Let me just get rid of the corporate background there. That's
Who's your buddy in the little canoe?
we have these mascots at Salesforce. This one's called Astro, I think.
Okay, cool. And do you have
Um,
any, is that totally an AI lake or is it taken based on some real lake?
it's as artificial as it gets, I think.
Okay.
Um,
Well, it's so cool to have you. Thank you so much. And we appreciate it. Where are you at in the world?
I'm at home on my farm in Denmark.
All right.
Um, I think when we talked a few weeks ago, I was just
I
out in
got
the
to see
fields.
some
Now,
of it. Yeah.
now I'm in the office.
And as the summer goes on there, what happens to your fields? Do you get drier through the summer? Do you have wet summers? What's the weather typically doing to your land?
Well, we're usually blessed with sufficient rainfall. Groundwater is at around 2 meters. We have sufficient water, but right now we're in a bit of a drought because we have an El Nino year globally in climate cycles. But that means in our case, it's warmer than usual. There've been heat waves across most of Europe. We're far enough north that we're not hit by the extreme high temperatures, but it's dry. It's dry and hot.
And when you're getting groundwater, when you're getting your well water, I assume you have a well. Do you use that shallow water aquifer, or do you go deeper for wherever your water you use is?
So our drinking water comes from around 40 feet,
Okay.
but there is water at shallower depths that we use for irrigation. And of course, as the drinking water, our borehole is right next to our neighbor's field who runs conventional agriculture, and they often grow potatoes. And if I don't know how much pesticides potatoes use, but we observe every time they go around with a sprayer, which seems to be about every 2 weeks, we think about, how long it takes until that seeps down to our drinking water. We have it tested frequently, and so far none has. It's not contaminated with pesticides, but it's different when you talk about it in abstract ways and say we should grow our food in a more responsible way, or when you see it directly leaking into your drinking water and you drink that stuff, right? It's a very different level of being affected by a problem. Yeah, you said you also had a borehole on your land, but I assume your water is deeper down.
Yeah, we drilled two new wells on our ranch property in the last, since I think we probably talked. One of them we went 900 feet and didn't hit yet.
Wow.
So we stopped at 900. We we have a shallow water aquifer from about 5 feet below our surface to where in our stream bed area, which is where we put this new well in at. So we expected, and we have neighbors that have hit it 200 feet, 400 feet. We knew we'd go at least 200, but didn't hit down to 900. Well, when you get that happening out in the desert, which we're in, that you can get an exception from the Department of Water Resources to allow you to take from the groundwater. So we drilled a second well. It's a 10-inch, by the way, the deep well is a 4-inch casing. This shallower well is a 10-inch casing that goes down 40 feet. And we're in a layer of water between 5 and about 40. So we're now going to be using that water. And we would have the same worry that you just expressed from upstream except we only have one human that lives upstream from us, and they're 2.5 miles away, and they're across an road, interstate highway, not an interstate freeway, but one of our major national roads. And I don't believe that they would be contaminating us at all. I have done some analysis also, and we don't have any kind of contamination. But we also don't have nitrates or phosphates. I'm curious, you've got to have nitrate and phosphate levels a little elevated, at least
Yeah,
from.
they are actually above EU norms in our drinking water. And if if we had very small children in our
Yes.
household, which we
Yeah.
don't anymore, we would be
Yeah.
concerned. But it's one of the things that we have to live with, because otherwise the alternative is to get a very expensive connection to the municipal water supply, because we're a bit far out from the nearest village. It will cost a lot of money. So at the moment we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And of course, the way forward is to change the way we do agriculture so the water is pure again. That's the thing to do. And on our fields, what we do is adaptive multi-paddock grazing. So we have flocks of sheep, and now we also have some horses, and we rotate them fairly frequently. So they graze very intensively on small patches of land. And then when the grass recovers, it builds stronger root systems. So at least we capture all the rainwater that falls on our property, and it's fairly clean when it sinks into the ground. So if all our neighbors would do agriculture that way, we wouldn't have any problems with our groundwater.
You
But we'll
mentioned
see.
that water is your drinking water. Do you get livestock water or from a different elevation? Do you have another well for that, or
No,
are your
it's the
livestock
same.
drinking from ponds and streams and such
We
that are
we
on?
have one little pond, but the livestock, they drink from we pump water for them from the same well. So it's yeah, but it's a fairly small operation, but we can already see that even in just the 5 years we've had the farm, there's been a surge in biodiversity with a lot more insects on the fields now. We monitor also the number of swifts and swallows and other birds here, and they've just grown so much just in a few years. It's amazing how quickly nature bounces back when you give it that chance.
Well, this is a
Ish.
good time in our talk then to just take you back a little bit in your own history. What got you initially motivated to do what you're doing at your farm? And then obviously to take it a step further and write this amazing book, which we're going to talk about, and I'm assuming you've done some other writing, and then put that all into the role of being working for a company that's one of the largest sales companies in the world in Salesforce, where you're the chief climate officer. So pull all those pieces together for us a little bit. I think Mark's going to pull your screen up so that you can see some things about you on it while we talk. We'll kind of ignore the screen unless we need to talk about it.
That's great. Do you want to record as well, or are we already being
Oh yeah,
recorded?
no, we're recording. We've probably got 5 or 6 different ways we're recording right now.
Okay.
To give you a little bit of that background, we our history, which is now we started June 6th into our 10th year. No, excuse me,
Wow.
our 11th year. We had our 10th anniversary. So we are in our 11th year. June 6th was the first one of these I ever did was June 6th in 2016. And we get about 1,000 views of of replays for every one view that we get for a live attendee. We've never been able to do very well with live attendees, but we really get great viewing from our recorded audience. So we record both with the system we use called Kajabi, which is what our website is based in, the platform, and then we record on Zoom, and we use a couple of other of these new Otter systems and others. And then Mark will actually edit and take out some things, put an in row in, an out row. And then when we have speakers that are willing to do multiple sessions with us, we then turn it into courses too, so that we can then put
Amazing.
into 5-minute sections, 10-minute segments, and so on. So
Amazing. Well, I'm happy to take you a little bit back in my
yeah,
history and my relationship with nature. I did my first ecosystem restoration project, I think, when I was 10 years old. I was restoring the pond in my grandparents' yard. And at the time, I didn't know that it was called ecosystem restoration or even what an ecosystem was, but I had this feeling of what works well in nature and what doesn't, just by listening and watching, listening to nature and watching what happens. And that particular ecosystem was very overgrown. There were very few frogs. There was very few opportunities for wildlife. So I restored that little piece of land, and I think I've stuck with that topic ever since then, including through over now 25 years after university and professional life. I was first working for the European Commission on the Natura 2000 protected area network, and then I was with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, that does the red list of threatened species and the World Protected Area Database and many other useful things, and established our office for East, South, Southeastern Europe and the Caucasus. And then for 15 years after that, I was at the United Nations Environment Program. I was first at one of the global Treaty on Biodiversity, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and then 10 years in Kenya, in Nairobi, where the UN Environment Program is headquartered. And I was leading their Nature for Climate team. So we had a big team focusing on protecting the world's tropical forests and restoring forests globally, and a climate finance team, and a lot of projects funded by these global funds for nature, like the Global Environment Fund and the Green Climate Fund. And then in 2020, Salesforce contacted me, and I must admit, at that point, I did not know what that company is or what it does. I heard about Salesforce because they were setting up the Trillion Trees initiative with our CEO, Mark Benioff, being very involved at that time. And I was setting up the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration at the UN. And they asked me for advice how to set up the Trillion Trees initiative with the World Economic Forum. So we ran a joint workshop, and then Salesforce's commitment was to plant 100 million trees by 2030. So they kept asking me for advice. What does that mean? How do you do that? Who do you work with? What is forest ecosystem restoration? How do you invest? And after a while, they said, we keep calling you for advice. Why don't you just come and work for us? And I must admit, I thought long and hard about the offer, because when you work in public service, you have a certain view of the private sector, that they're all about, greenwashing often, and it's all about corporate profits. But I felt that with Salesforce, the company has hundreds of thousands of customers across large corporates, but also 60,000 NGOs, for example. And we have a trust relation with all of these entities. So for me to be able to speak with the world's Fortune 500 companies about what is a good climate strategy, what is a good nature strategy, what should they do about water, on a peer-to-peer level, on a trust basis, it is a great opportunity to be a platform for change. So I took that opportunity 4 years ago, and it's been a very, very fascinating ride in the private sector. Of course, now supercharged by the rise of AI and the amazing technological tools that we have at our disposal, but also some of the challenges that come with it. So that's how I arrived. I'm still on the advisory board for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. And I felt I should put all my experience with that topic into a book, because I was struck by the science being there and the knowledge that we need to change and what we could do, and still there was not sufficient action. So in the book, I dive deeper into why it is that we seem unable to translate what science tells us into better economic policies, better social policies, more ecological literacy, basically better knowledge how to manage our fragile spaceship planet Earth.
What, as you observe those, let's put your farmer hat on for a second and your neighbors and such. And you already mentioned that one of them is a more traditional type of a farmer and probably doesn't follow a lot of the things that you believe in. How would you compare that one to other neighbors that you have? And having written the book, have you had people that are your friends and neighbors in your community say, Tim, gosh, what you're teaching here is something we ought to be doing more in our farming and such. So what's your local community observation been?
It's a great question because it's actually quite fascinating. We live between two very large dairy farms who have hundreds of, one has over 1,000 head of cattle, or actually it's a dairy farm. And one of Denmark's largest organic vegetable producers who has about 10,000 acres of organic vegetable production. So we have sort of both extremes of agriculture, but also the industrial scale organic agriculture. And then we have some small scale permaculture and regenerative farming here. I think there's a growing realization that agriculture depends on the health of the soil, and that is relatively new. You would think, wow, that's pretty obvious, but for the past century at least, what was taught in agricultural schools is that the soil is like a black box. Nobody quite knows how it works, but you put some chemicals in and then some plants come out. You don't really need to worry about what's happening in the soil. And that paradigm is completely changing. It is the biodiversity in the soil. It's the microbes in the soil that feed plants and make them grow and make them healthy and nutritious. And that understanding is now spreading across all kinds of farmers, whether they're small or big. We've just finished making another round of compost tea. Well, my wife actually runs the farm. I have to add that here. I have a day job, right? So I help out whenever I can. But we've just made another round of compost tea to stimulate the microbiodiversity in the soil. And that realization will change all agriculture, whether it's large scale industrial agriculture or small scale permaculture. I think that's a great step forward. Many of my neighbors, of course, say, this is, I believe it when I see it, as in often with farming. And when they see it, that it works, they're happy to adopt it, no matter how outlandish the idea might seem, but they want to see it first and they want to see that it works.
The large organic farm, are they greenwashing or are they truly doing things, in your opinion, just what you've seen the right way?
They're certainly trying to do things the right way, and they are focused on soil health and soil biodiversity. But they also have 300,000 chicken. They have these chicken in large
A
animal
large
factory
calf
settings.
so a combined agricultural type, like the dairies you're describing, correct?
Like the dairy I described. So I have mixed feelings about that. I'd rather that they run that whole operation on organic principles, and they have their own biomass plant for energy generation, and so it is a very circular system. And I have a lot of respect for what they do. I think they could do better in terms of biodiversity because even their fields are, of course, monocultures of one crop or another. But it is a step in the right direction. I have a lot of respect for what they do. And they don't spray pesticides, obviously, which is, great for our groundwater. And when I said earlier that our neighbor, the conventional potato farmer, sprays a lot of pesticides, I think one of the challenges we have is it's actually not the neighbor. The neighbor leases out her fields to a larger farmer who then contracts a machine station that is 50 miles away from here, who come with huge machines, hire workers who've never been to this field, have no relationship with this land, have no idea that we drink the water that's underneath where they spray. So that relationship with nature has gotten lost. I think rebuilding that and rebuilding that also for every farmer is something that farmers everywhere I talk to welcome because they are connected to their land or want to be at least. But often the way our agricultural machinery is set up these days, it is very hard for them to maintain that connection to and that understanding of the land. But that is also changing. We see a lot of signs of hope for regenerative agriculture everywhere in the world, small to large initiatives, even in developing and the developed countries everywhere. We see this surge of regenerative agriculture.
Ken, let's take us to your book again a little bit more. And here's why. I got to tell you where a person I spent a good part of a day with about 3 weeks ago, which is Joel Salatin. Joel is a name you've got to know, and Joel's a good friend of mine. And he was out here in Idaho going to a homesteading conference in northern Idaho, and I was able to help get him a speaking engagement here in my local area. So he spoke to a group of about 1,000. We only expected about 400, and we had 1,000 people show up, and which is great. And Joel's a great speaker. He does a very good job at what he does. Anyway, but I showed him your book because I had gotten it from you right before. He says, "Whoa, that is so awesome." He said, "I've been trying to get a major publisher like Wiley to publish anything I do for years, and I can't get it done." And I used to be a college professor, and I would use books written by large publishers. And everybody, if you don't know it, it's out there in our audience. This is a large publisher. I don't know about in Europe, but in the US, I don't know their metrics, but I would guess more educational books at the college level are published by Wiley than maybe anybody other than Excelsior, which is a European company. I mean, they're in the top five at least, right, Tim? I mean, it is
That's right. Yeah,
well,
yeah. I was very
yeah.
happy when they said they would publish my book, and been very happy with the collaboration with Wiley. And I think Joel Salton is a great pioneer in this field, so it's hopefully he'll get a chance to publish his books. I see that there are books about this topic now popping up everywhere. This is not the only one.
That's
My
where I
book
was.
was published about a year ago,
Yeah.
and up to that point, I think that this notion that nature is not just a nice to have, it's not just a luxury that you have in a national park somewhere and you keep for a summer vacation, but nature is our most essential infrastructure for all of human civilization. We basically rely on nature 24/7 for everything we eat or drink or produce in our economy. And that realization has somehow gotten lost. So we have to get back to that notion that nature is essential infrastructure for any society, and we have to invest in nature in that level of infrastructure. And this coming back to a reciprocity with nature where we don't just take. We are in an abusive relationship with nature right now. We take. We take, all of nature's resources, and we don't give anything back. And abusive relationships, they don't last. They end eventually, and usually not in a good way. And coming back to a relationship of reciprocity requires, on our part, that we build some ecological literacy to better understand what nature actually is and what nature does for us. And that's what the book is about.
Who would you say are your, I'm going to use the word hero right now, and then I'll also then use as maybe another one called being mentors in this agriculture regenerative sort of space. Who are the people you look up to more than more others?
Well, one of them wrote the foreword to my book, Jane Goodall, who sadly passed away last year, but she was
Yeah.
definitely one of my great heroes in this entire movement. And apart from her, there are, of course, the great scientists who are looking at planetary health and the health of our entire system, because Earth as a whole is a system and has a vastly complicated and complex system, vastly more complex than any machine that we could ever design. But it is a system, and understanding that system is the science of ecology. Interestingly, if you look at the words economy and ecology, they share the same root in ancient Greek. Oikos is our common home or our household. And economy is the management of the household, and ecology is the knowledge of the household. What we're doing at the moment is we're managing this household, planet Earth, without the knowledge of how it works and what its limitations are. And that means our economy is malfunctioning and is getting to its limits of where supply chains for food are starting to be more and more fragile. If you speak to any retailer right now, whether it's Walmart or also any large food corporate like McDonald's, they will tell you they have increasing problems with their agricultural supply chain because supply chains are being disrupted by extreme weather events, by climate change, by pests, by ecosystem instability. And that kind of ecological knowledge, how to run our economy, our household, is something that we urgently need to rebuild. So I think most of my heroes are from the field of ecology. There's a great young professor called Thomas Crowther, who's also just written a book called Nature's Echo, highly, highly recommended. There's Johan Rockström, who's a great scientist who has come up with the term of the planetary boundaries. So what are the planetary basically life support systems that we depend on, and how do they work and where are their limits? How do we repair them? And then there are all the grassroots movements and people who are doing this on an everyday basis, like my wife, who's a permaculture pioneer and is also one of my heroes in this movement because that's the real hard work. It's fairly easy to, write about it and talk about it, but doing it is hard work, especially when you're up against a system that incentivizes and supports large scale, industrial scale agriculture and does not support small scale farming.
Give us the two names you just gave earlier again. Mark, look both of them up. I'm sure they both have web pages. Those are actually two names that I've heard but don't know well. Those would
Yeah.
probably be more European. So, I mean, give us those two names. Mark will look them
So
up for us.
Johan Rockström is Swedish. He leads the
Uh,
Stockholm Resilience Institute. And
uh,
Professor Thomas Crowther or Tom Crowther is heads the Crowther Lab. He is an ecologist who's published many impactful studies, including one on the global restoration potential of trees. And he has recently written this book called Nature's Echo, which is great because it links the science of ecology with how we need to learn from ecological principles for running a better economic system, a system that is more capable of ensuring the wealth and the health and the well-being and the prosperity of all citizens. And linking those two concepts, I think, very, very powerful. And obviously, Jane Goodall, as you know, wrote the foreword to the book. And she passed away 2 weeks before the book was published. So she finished writing the foreword. We had the book finalized, and then sadly she passed away. But this was one of the last things she published. And as you know, Jane was an anthropologist and a real pioneer in especially chimpanzee research, and also one of the first female scientists who ever get a PhD in that field. So she was a pioneer on many levels.
well, Mark Shepard was a very good, is a, or was, because she's dead now, but a friend of Jane's and actually did help him write a couple of the books that he has written. Um, has Wiley told you, or do you get involved in marketing? Have any college professors or secondary school adopted and using this book as a part of their curriculum yet? And is that a goal?
I'd be very happy for any tips on linking this with college curricula or contact with professors, because Wiley is a great book manufacturer. They make great books, but and I thought actually, as a first-time author, I thought that they would do a lot of the marketing. But when the book was finished, they said, "Here's your book. Good luck." And the marketing is basically on the author. This is the modern way of making books now. There's not a lot of support for the marketing, and since this is not my full-time job. I'm doing the best I can, but any support or tips that you have, I would greatly appreciate.
Well, I'd love to chat with you about some of that. And I still maintain I was a college professor myself for almost 40 years and active on the teaching side for the first 10 of those, and then mainly a grad student overseer. So I had grad students at Colorado State University for 30 years and all in this area, regenerative, different kinds of agriculture. Um, I have the either fortune or unfortune of knowing a lot of big farmers, guys with, millions of acres who don't care about the ground is just a place where roots are at, so it supports the plant, and all the nutrition that the plants get are from those pesticides, those herbicides, those nitrogen, phosphorus just get flown in and put on them. And they will say, and these are not bad people, they're not horrible human beings. They'll say, it's my living. You don't understand. This is all I do for a living. I farm and I get paid for producing a certain amount of volume. If I don't have that volume, I don't make money. And by doing this, I can get that volume. If I go to this nerdy thing that you want me to do and worry about the soil and whether there's lots of little bugs and such in it, my corn volumes are going to go from 100 bushels an acre down to 20 bushels an acre, and I'll be losing money. So what should I be doing? And I'll say, well, do you care about what your kids have? No, not really. They're not going to want to farm and ranch anyway. And by the way, that's a very interesting situation in American agriculture, at least. The vast majority of large farmers, their kids don't want to have, and I'm talking 35, 40-year-old kids, don't want to have anything to do with what they're doing. So we have a huge succession problem in this country. So guess what's happening in this country? You probably know. Guess who are buying those farms? The Chinese, what are probably what some people would say are enemies, and what are they going to do with them? I don't know, but it's probably not going to be good. So large agriculture is going to suffer in our country, at least from the United States, from this succession issue within the next 10 years. And those billions of acres of farmland that are being used now with no care about soils, all they care about is production and selling to the large buyers that they sell to. And remember, it's not very many crops. It's wheat, soy, corn, and that's about it. And there's a lot of smaller on the vegetable side, but really and I guess oats and rye and some of the other grains that would be rotational. And I don't know if Europe is quite as bad as this kind of farming as we are here in the U.S. But that's why I look to people like Gabe Brown, who has 10,000 plus acres and is growing corn and wheat and soy profitably using soil dynamics that are positive. So anyway, I was just curious. Mark,
We have definitely we have a similar succession issue in Europe. Average farmer age is now approaching 60, which is really concerning. What we see though is when there is a new way of doing farming that is more in tune with biodiversity as the main driving force of productivity, then it becomes attractive to young people. They just don't want to farm in the way that is both not very profitable. It's only working because of massive state subsidies. That's actually similar between the US and the EU. It's not that this farming of using heavy external, expensive, by the way, fossil fuel fertilizers and pesticides, it's not that it's hugely profitable. It's just sort of barely scraping by and it's massively subsidized. What we see though is when you change the entire system to be more productive on the basis of soil health, you save massive amounts of money on nitrogen, on other fertilizers, and on pesticides. I really love, I mean, of course, Kiss the Ground and these documentaries and the work of Gabe Brown. One that I also really like is Roots So Deep You Can See the Devil Down There. Do you know Peter Bick, Peter Bick
yeah,
is a professor at Arizona State University. He's done this great documentary of comparing 5 conventional cattle farms in the US Southeast um, and 5 that use adaptive multi-paddock grazing. And the social dynamic behind convincing the farmers that this new way is not just about the birds and the butterflies who come back to your farm and the water that is suddenly being retained, but it's about driving down costs and increasing profits. And the transition phase is the part that costs money. Once you're in the new system, it is actually more profitable. That's a great documentary. I highly recommend Peter's work. He's done a 10-year science project, multidisciplinary project, where they looked at everything from the gas flows of methane and CO2 and all these gases from production of AMP grazing and conventional grazing. But mostly what convinced the farmers was that it actually costs them less in bills and it makes them more profit. And then at the end, I mean, I'm not a spoiler maybe, but at the end of the series, it's a 4-part documentary. All the conventional farms adopt the new system. And interestingly, their children take over then that system and that thinking and adopt it on the farm. I think these two things are linked. The succession question in agriculture, which is an existential problem for many countries. If we don't have people who produce our food, we have a big problem. And the return to more regenerative systems in agriculture. Those two questions are definitely linked in my mind. And we see increasing evidence for that. And in Europe, luckily, some of the state subsidies, the European Union is spending about $60 billion per year on agricultural subsidies. And some of that support is now shifting to highly productive systems that support biodiversity, like agroforestry. For the first time, here in Denmark at least, for the first time since last year, we can use subsidies to plant trees on fields to produce more multi-layered crop structures, to have shade trees for the livestock. Those things were not possible just a few years ago. So things are changing. I think it's and that works for big or small agriculture. That's absolutely scalable.
Have you attended any broadly regenerative living conferences in Europe? And if so, have you attended any that have occurred over a period of years? And what have you seen for numbers of people attending? Here in the US, I go to several different ones. The numbers haven't changed through the years. If anything, they've gone down, unfortunately. I mean, I wish I was more of an optimist. I really want to be, because I've personally done regenerative farming. Interestingly, your story took you back to your being 10 years old. I lived in a desert when I was 10 years old, and I followed desert ecology, and I cared about it. That was just something that I had in my heart and my mind. And I've stayed involved with desert ecology for many, many years since. But I don't see in that valley that I grew up in, which used to be called the alfalfa capital of Southern California, all the pivot irrigation systems are gone now. There isn't 10 acres of alfalfa because they ruined the land in less than 2 generations. They took what was desert and turned it into farmland by irrigation water. But then they found that they couldn't do that profitably any longer. So my friends whose dads were the first generation of farmers after World War II, they're gone now. I don't have one friend of kids that I grew up with that's still in farming in their early 70s, which is just sad. And that's an example of the opposite of what we're talking about, and the kind of a story that you wish would have had a better ending. But in that particular area, it hasn't. But that's where I learned it. And I could see it, 60 years ago, that you weren't going to be able to continue to do things the way that those farmers and ranchers were doing things. And history has borne it out. The Dust Bowl days in the 1920s and 30s, with the weather changes that occurred here, we could have another one of those. That's not in the past in this country. If we see a massive weather change like occurred in the 30s, there's going to be the quote traditional ag that's going on throughout the Midwestern United States is going to be hugely affected in a negative way. So I'm also
Well,
very passionate about this topic, like you are, Tim. So
well, we are, as I mentioned, I sit on an advisory board for the UN called the Advisory Board for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, where it's the decade from 2021 to 2030. So we're halfway, and the UN Secretary General has to submit a report to the General Assembly in October. And so we've been trying to track this for across the planet, not just the US or Europe. And what we find is that there's there's a strong trend of a lot more local ecosystem restoration projects. If you go to Instagram, for example, you look at hashtag generation restoration, which is the title of my book, but is also the hashtag for the UN decade on ecosystem restoration. You see now over 150,000 different projects and mentions and posts. And you go to one of my favorite platforms online called restore.eco. So restore without an E at the end, .eco. And there's now almost 300,000 restoration projects that mostly just started within the last 10 years globally. So I think there is a groundswell of action, and most importantly, there's a mind shift happening, which is partly a generational mind shift, but it is also a shift that comes from the realization that you just described. When you see that something cannot be sustained in the long term, that's the definition of unsustainable. It's much easier to define that than actually what sustainability is. But when you see something cannot be sustained, you have to change it. And we see that the way we produce food cannot be sustained. And everybody is realizing that, from the largest producers to the agri-food companies, to the retailers, to the traders. And there is a surge of activities. It's not yet at the scale where we would like it, where the million hectare or million acre farmers change the way they do business. But I think that's just a question of time until we see changes. We just submitted, as Salesforce, we nominated a project in India for the Earthshot Prize. I don't know if you've heard of the Earthshot Prize. It's Prince William's initiative to reward the most promising, sort of the moonshot analogy, the most promising efforts to save and restore planet Earth. And we submitted this amazing project in India, in Andhra Pradesh, for the Earthshot Prize. And they've managed over the past years to now shift over 1 million smallholder farmers. So there's about 6 million smallholder farmers. They farm about 15 million acres. And 1 million of them have already shifted to what is called community-based natural farming, where they don't use external fertilizers or fossil fuel fertilizers or pesticides. They make everything themselves in their village based on neem paste and other local ingredients. And the government of the state of Andhra Pradesh, which is a state with 55 million people, they save $1 billion per year in fossil fuel fertilizer subsidies by shifting to this new way of agriculture. The food is more nutritious, it's more resilient, the farmers have higher profits, and it's just a win-win all around, to the degree that young IT engineers who live in the city, in Hyderabad and other cities, are starting to move back to the countryside to go into farming because it's more profitable than eking out a living in a city where costs are high and everything's expensive. So we've seen even people moving back to the countryside because of the success of this massive shift to natural farming in India.
Mark, go to rootsodeep.org and put that screen up for us. Well, so we're talking through. That's Peter Bick's site. I've not met Peter yet, and he's a great example, though, of what you've just been saying, Tim, of somebody relatively recent. If you don't kind of stay engaged, I don't think he was really well known at all 10 years ago, even maybe 5. And yet if you look at, he's got videos here. He's got his podcasts that have had millions and millions of views, which is awesome. So
They have amazing reach on social media. Peter is an absolutely wonderful person. So if you can have a chance to speak with him, I would highly recommend that. Most importantly, though, I think they've accompanied what they did with a 10-year, very, very solid science program. So they can document. And on this website, which I love, Roots So Deep, there is, if you go to AMP Research at the top, you will see there's a treasure trove of all the papers and publications that have come out of that 10-year process. There's tons and tons of published research in very highly respected academic journals, all from the work of that Peter has been catalyzing with Arizona State University, with a lot of other universities. So the evidence is irrefutable that this is better for biodiversity, but it's also better for the farmer. It's better for the soil. It's better for water retention. It's better for resilience. It's just not better for some large corporates who make a lot of money from farmers for very expensive products that outsource a lot of the knowledge of how farming works to labs and large conglomerates that provide you with all the tools that you put into your soil. If you don't need that anymore, of course, there are a few companies that would suffer from a shift like this, but who would gain is definitely the farmer and the communities and society as a whole, because food will be more plentiful, will be produced in more resilient farms, and there'll be a resurgence of biodiversity. So this is a treasure trove of research. So it's an absolutely amazing
if
project.
I was an 18-year-old son or daughter of a rancher in the central US, farmer rancher who's traditional, okay, so again, they're not in our mental state. And I'm an 18-year-old going to go to Colorado State University, the largest ag school in the central United States. And I want to study ag because I want to learn the best things I can to be able to take over for my dad when he retires. What do you think the chances are I'd get one course about what Peter Bick's talking about here in the ag school at Colorado State?
Well, I hope that the chances are pretty good because
They're really low. Chances are you wouldn't get anything. As a matter of fact, you'd be drawn. And I probably know 80% of the profs at Colorado State University School of Agriculture. They'd be nice to him. They would say, yeah, he's fun, but whatever. I the big ag schools in this country, Colorado State being one of them, one of the very biggest, University of Minnesota being another one, Utah State, I mean, you name them, UC Davis, whatever, they would think this guy's a joke, that Peter Bick's a joke. They think I'm a joke. I've been told to my face that I'm a joke, and yet I had the only
this is a
profitable
very
multi.
normal development in social change. The
Yeah,
saying, first they laugh about you and then they fight you, and then
right.
at the
And
end they
then
they
then
join
they
you because
embrace
you
you.
can't,
Yeah, yeah.
because it
Well,
becomes irrefutable. Big ag has a massive problem, and that problem is not only greenhouse gas emissions and the collapse of ecosystems. It is that the soil is no longer able to retain and absorb rain. And when the rain, because it's now with the changing climate or extreme weather events, we have more and more flash floods or very heavy downpours. If the soil is not able to absorb that moisture because it is so baked and devoid of life, big ag has a huge problem that you cannot irrigate away or spray away. And if they don't recognize that and think this is a joke, they should read the science. If they're professors at a college, they should read science. I hope they do. Otherwise they shouldn't have their jobs. But there's a lot of really, really good papers in here, and then they should have a discussion on the basis of that published science, not on the basis of what they think has a place in traditional teaching. I really hope that there's a shift happening, because what is clear is that the agri-food system is broken. And that's not me just saying it. It's the United Nations had a large agri-food summit 2 years ago where this was basically the tagline that it needs to be fixed. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization is saying that, and of course, in the U.S. in particular, the UN seems like a faraway place that's not very relevant to what happens in the U.S. But the rest of the world is definitely waking up to this issue.
This is awesome. I agree with you. I was going to pull up the Colorado State University website, and then I'll lead you through it to go to the School of Agriculture because I want to I'm going to call out about 10 professors here who, if we got them on with us in a debate setting today, they would just fringe, although I don't think they'd ever agree to because their funding comes from Monsanto and from Bayer and from whoever is producing big ag, that they have to stay where the funding is. That's the negative of education in this country, at least still. And I hope it changes. But are you pulling it up, Mark? I'm looking at a different page. I've got to pull my Zoom back up here.
What I found interesting about Peter's work at Arizona State was that he actually went in the beginning, he went to McDonald's and asked, if they could fund the work because he wanted large ag players to be involved. And McDonald's said, yes, sure, we'll fund this. And I think that was a pretty smart move because if this is seen as a fringe movement that doesn't have big money looking into it as an option, then of course you have difficulties competing with large research funding that goes into business as usual. But I mean, to the credit of McDonald's, they did fund this initial research, and I think there's an awakening also in other big corporates that the system has to change. If you look at regenerative agriculture as a term, interestingly, that big ag is now starting to really jump onto that bandwagon, but with a view to capture it and to sort of to turn it into something that they define. The definition of what regenerative agriculture is really now being pretty hard fought, at least here in Europe, between big ag, who know that they have to change, and the small pioneers in permaculture and regenerative agriculture that have coined the term initially. But I think that's a good sign that big ag is trying to I wouldn't say get on board, is more like capture that new movement, but at least they're paying attention.
Mark, click on the menu there and let's just go to the School of Ag. I want to just point out some profs. I'm going to call some people out here because I know these people. Academics up there, academics, far up. There we go. Now you got to go to, well, why don't you keep looking around? Look for the School of Ag, Mark, while I just want to ask Tim a couple other questions. But what do you think? I'm going to get to some of the questions some of our audience has asked. Susan Simard work? That's a name I don't know. Do you know that name, Tim?
She's the author of a great book called Finding the Mother Tree. She's a professor in Canada, I think in Toronto, but she's famous for coining the term the wood wide web. She was one of the first scientists who proved that there is active collaboration between different species of plants beyond what we know from mycorrhiza and the symbiosis relationships there. And that diversity makes any system more stable and resourceful and abundant and productive, which again shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody because it's really, it's really very obvious if you know anything about nature. But it is something that had to be proven because in forestry in Canada at that time, and I don't want to speak for her because she wrote a fascinating book about it, but in forestry in Canada at the time, the common notion was you can only plant one species of mostly pine or spruce. You have to spray away, you have to round up everything else that is seen as a competition, and then you maximize for timber production value. we now see the results of that kind of narrow-minded simplification of monoculture forestry in the terms of pests and fires that are ravaging these monocultures that are ecologically unstable. And she was one of the first scientists who really proved that diversity in a system leads to more resilience and ultimately more productivity, longer term stability. It's called finding the mother tree. Sorry, there was a question attached to that. You said.
Oh, well, no, he just was saying if we looked at her work. Another lady he points out, this is one of our audiences, Laura Norman at USGS. Do you know that name, Tim? Is that somebody?
No, I've not come across that name, Laura M. Norman at
We'll check her
USGS.
out. But Mark, I'm going to just show people one little thing that's hopefully a little positive, but I don't think it will be. Go to the soil science. You had it on the page here. I'm going to just go to the staff. You can find them, or agricultural biology. Pull up some of the people. There'll be lists of the profs. Because I bet if we look at almost any prof whose name we find on this page, go to staff right here, dedicated team, faculty, go to the faculty one. And we look up their publications, we're going to find that they are not at all regenerative. But I'm going to see which names I recognize because I know most of these people. I know Chris, not regenerative. I know Lisa, not regenerative. I know Mark, he might be. He's actually one of the newer folks on the staff there. Cynthia, no way. And these are the lead profs. Got Gaines, no way. And here's a guy that works with molecular weed science, and he would basically be funded by Big Ag in a huge way. So Mark, now look up Todd Gaines. He's one that let's just point to him real quick. Just do a quick search of Dr. Todd Gaines.
I just want to say that I don't know any of these people and I don't want to make any judgment calls on what they believe or don't believe. But I encourage all of them to read the science from the Emp Grazing project, which is relevant really for climate change, resilience, biodiversity. It is focused on livestock grazing, so it's not necessarily on for crop production, but there are, of course, a lot of other studies now on the links between ecology and profitable agriculture.
By the way, I knew this also. I didn't remember it until I saw his name come up. He's a great guy. I like Todd. One of the things I was taught when I went through and got my degrees, which I have a few of, is that you don't do what Todd did if you want to get a job somewhere. Well, look at this. The guy has never been anywhere in his adult life than Colorado State University. That's going to teach you a lot of diversity. We were told do not ever go to the same school for your bachelor's, your master's, and your PhD. Do not try to come back and be a professor at any of those same. Spread some diversity by getting what you learned out in the world at some other place. See if he's got some go further down his page there and see if there's some articles that he's written, because I think we'll be able to look at them quickly and see. Maybe not. You may have to just look it up separately, Mark. Maybe he's even got a website, so maybe there would be some of his written stuff there. You have to scroll down and see if he's got some articles written. It used to be we also had which is if you were going to be a professor at Colorado State or a university like that, where the vast majority of what you're doing is research and teaching grad students. You do very little undergraduate course work that you needed to publish. And the old saying was publish or perish. If you didn't publish, if you didn't get if you didn't get refereed journal publications, you're going to die. You're not going to make it. Your career would be over. I don't think that's the case as much anymore, Tim, and I'm not sure it was always a good thing, but that was sort of what you pretty much had to have. That's not, we don't want to be on podcast, Mark. That's not gonna help us. Anyway, we'll look some more of this up. What other questions from our audience here? Let me see that because we're getting very close to our time here. Don't see anything else in the short term here. Coyote is howling. Better read water retention. I don't see any more. Well, I've actually given Mark Shepard and I were at White Oak Pastures with Mr. Harris and his family, which is a great story because he came from a father, World War II vintage, the farmer that was completely traditional, big ag, and the Harrises have changed that dramatically, have gone completely, and they employ whole communities of people. It's both local and local production and regenerative and all the right sort of things. So it is happening. I just love it when we get somebody like Tim on that can see the picture in a bigger way. And Tim, I am going to go out and try to help you market this to college profs because
That would be wonderful. I'm giving lectures once, guest lectures. I just was at University of Copenhagen here in Denmark for a guest lecture, and going to Paris soon. But the book was written next to my day job, so it's also not, it's I wish I could spend more time marketing it, but I get very good reviews and people give me good feedback on the book because I think this notion of that ecology is not something that is a niche science anymore. It is essential to the functioning of civilization and our economy. I think that realization is slowly dawning on everybody who is making mistakes that cost society a lot of money. If you mentioned the Great Dust Bowl earlier, I write about that in the book. That it was $1 trillion ecological literacy blunder not to know how to farm that land and to basically do tillage where you shouldn't till. And so the amount of the amount of national wealth that was destroyed by making the wrong decisions based on not having basic ecological literacy is huge. And we're making those mistakes still all the time, and it wouldn't be very difficult to fix if we just had a little bit more ecological literacy, which we urgently need because we're coming to the end of the road where we can just treat nature as a limitless resource that we can extract from, and ending that abusive relationship with nature is something that is on the horizon. So I think we're going to get there slowly but surely, because if we don't, this relationships that we have with nature is going to end. It's going to not end well for us. I think nature is going to be fine. It's not going to end well for humans.
Well, Tim, thank you so much. Mark, thank you as always, for being in the background, helping us out. Thank you, the audience, for your comments and questions. And we will be on again tomorrow, where I do talk with Wayne. So anybody wants to show up for that is cool. And obviously, this will be a replay. It'll come out in a couple of days. And Mark, real quick, I think we have somebody else either next week or the following week that is exciting.
We have on the 27th. So Jonathan is going to be on the 27th.
Okay, Jonathan's last name is, help me.
Hold on, give me a second, I'll pull it up. Okay, so Jonathan Lundgren, yes.
Tim, thanks so much. Mark, audience, thank you.
Wayne.
Have a great one. We'll talk to you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.